kind of emotional around here for the last week. I mean, emotional on two different levels. One, in my life with my family. The girls got all dressed up for prom, and the little guy had his end of year tournament for sports, and my parents are celebrating big occasions in their lives. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm feeling a lot of things right now, and it just happens to coincide with what we got going on in Nehemiah, which is a really squishy-hearted passage here in Nehemiah 8, where even if you don't think there's a God behind any of this stuff in the Bible, or you're not quite sure what to make of it, even at the most basic human level, this is a powerful part of the story. It's a redemption part of the story, where people who have got a lot wrong over the course of their journey are sensing that, and they're soft-hearted, broken-hearted about it, and they're doing something about it. They have a historical anchor point, and they're coming out of their wandering. They're coming into a place of clarity, and they're doing it in a unified fashion with open hearts, and it just feels like something really meaningful is occurring. And I've been enjoying these conversations. However, I've also missed the fart jokes, and I think it's a pity that this passage really hasn't lent itself to the normal requisite number of fart jokes that I think are really the heart and soul of this entire podcast, but regrettably, this is just how it's going to have to be. There's a prayer back at the beginning here of Nehemiah 1 that the more I look at this, I've never noticed it on any other trip through Nehemiah. I'm just catching it this time through with you guys. But this prayer at the beginning of Nehemiah 1, it's a big deal. It isn't just there to help us get a sense of who Nehemiah is. It's there to set up a lot of the thematic payoffs of the entire book and the speed with which we go from details and facts about how things are, and then so-and-so showed up, and I asked for a report about Jerusalem. He said, it's very bad. The gates are burned with fire. And it goes from very matter-of-fact, narrative, indicative tone, mood, to really emotive, subjunctive mood with wishes and hopes and expressions of need in this opening prayer of Nehemiah, where, as we've discussed many times, he starts by saying that you're a good God. You're the God of heaven who keeps his covenants. Well, I'm just going to read it to you again. O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands. Let your ear, catch that part, I'm going to come back to that, it's very important. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We've acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Verse 8, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations, but if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to a place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear, mark that, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. And then we go into the whole throne room scene with Artaxerxes, where he sat in front of Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes notices that, and it starts a whole conversation that results in Nehemiah making the problem of the people back in Jerusalem his problem, and traveling cross country to go and fix this thing in record-breaking speed, bursting through all of the objections and obstacles and barriers and resistance put in front of him. But how about that language in there? Twice, he's praying to God for his ear to be open to his prayers. He's praying in a way, soften your heart toward us. Remember us. Nehemiah is modeling that softness. Not that God needs like something modeled to him, but he's demonstrating a right posture before the king, coming to God and saying, the only right way for me to approach you is this. Let your ear be open to hear this thing. And so we have that thematic idea of the open heart and the open ear leaning in to hear that's introduced in Nehemiah 1. Nehemiah is doing that. He's assuming that posture, but he's asking God to honor what he said he would do in the past and assume that posture toward his people as well, even though his people really aren't doing this in mass yet. Well, fast forward 7 chapters, and now we're in chapter 8, and the people are doing this in mass. In fact, Nehemiah 8:3, in my translation, it's a a pretty sterile rendering of what it looks like the original language says, but in my translation it says, "And all the people listened attentively to the book of the law." That's very, very literal, but the more poetic, and I'm told by people who are much better at Hebrew than I could ever dream of being, the more poetic rendering of this would be something like, they leaned in with their hearts, or they leaned in with their ears to hear. Like, you can almost see the image of a whole crowd of people listening to someone up front talking who doesn't have a microphone, leaning in, maybe even cupping their ears and staying very quiet so that they can hear what is being said. And whether that is literally there in the original language or not, visually, you can see it. I mean, it's being communicated either way. And this taps into a theme of ears that are open to hear that runs through the whole Bible. Isaiah chapter 6 taps into this. Jesus, in fact, references this concept of open ears that come with a soft and attentive heart in Matthew chapter 13, when he's talking about the parable of the sower and explaining how that works. You'll recall Matthew 13 is the third of the 5 big speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured. And here, this is Jesus talking. He says in Matthew 13:13 and moving forward, "This is why I," Jesus talking, "speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, quote, 'You'll be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they've closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them.'" You see how this connects, right? I mean, how much does that tie in with the language that Nehemiah is leaning into from Deuteronomy to say, God, you made this promise. You said that eventually when we come to our senses, even if we've wandered far, far away, even to the farthest horizon, that you'll forgive, that you'll hear us, that your ear will be open, your eyes attentive to us, your heart soft to us, and that you would forgive and that you would put back together what we've broken. I mean, really, this prophecy that Jesus is quoting from Isaiah chapter 6 here in Matthew 13, it's the same material. It's the same exact theme, the same exact concept that Nehemiah is leaning into. But who opens those ears? Who opens those eyes? Well, God is obviously the opener of his own ears and his own eyes, but he's also held out as the opener of the eyes and ears of the people. You flip back here a couple pages in Matthew. They're sticking together. There we go. You go to Matthew chapter 9, and this is where you get the contrast between the people whose eyes work just fine, but they can't see the truth about God, that being the Pharisees, and the people whose eyes don't work at all, but they can see the truth about God, plain as day. Matthew 9:27. As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith will it be done to you." And their sight was restored. Literally in this passage, Jesus is opening their eyes. But figuratively, Jesus or God opened their eyes to see what was actually going on. How about Matthew 16, the stuff about Peter, where he makes his confession of Christ? "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven." I'm bringing all of this up because all of these themes tie together, and we're supposed to connect these dots. Who moved in Nehemiah's heart in the first place for him to realize the error of his own ways, his family's ways, his people's ways? It wasn't Nehemiah. It seemed like it was to the casual reader, but it's God who opens eyes according to what the Bible teaches. God opened Nehemiah's eyes. Nehemiah saw how things were, and then he acted faithfully. Even though I don't think we've seen any miracles in Nehemiah, it's pretty clear that the text is holding out the idea that God is blessing what Nehemiah is doing. He's on the right track. And that is further confirmed when it isn't just Nehemiah who's had his ears and eyes opened, but now here we are in chapter 8, and everybody has their eyes and ears opened. Everybody's heart is soft. How did that happen? It was a really great moment like we talked about yesterday. No, that's not what started it. The moment is the outflow of God's work in people's hearts through seemingly benign things like just a big story that kind of clicked for everybody all at once. But I think if I'm reading the text right, there's also a supernatural moving that is occurring anytime this happens in the hearts of an individual or a whole group of people. In Nehemiah 8, when everybody's crying and Ezra and Nehemiah say, "This day is sacred to the Lord your God, don't mourn or weep," I think probably those two leaders are looking at what's happening with the people and they're seeing it. God moved in our hearts, Nehemiah and Ezra. Now look at this. God is moving in the hearts of the people here as well. Clearly, God's ears are open to our prayers. Clearly, God's eyes are open to us. Clearly, the people are following suit. There's a moment of reconnection here, and this is really what I'm driving at by going to Isaiah, by going to Matthew, by going back to Deuteronomy, by going to Nehemiah 1. This is really what I'm driving at here today. This isn't just a moment that is a cool moment where the music swells. It's a little bit trite and there's some tropes here, but who cares? I just want to feel something and let's go with it. And we can really conjure this if we know what we're doing at any given time. No, this isn't that kind of thing. This is a supernatural intersection between a God whose eyes are open and whose heart is open, and a people whose eyes he has opened and whose hearts he has opened and whose ears he has opened. Something very real is happening here, and Ezra and Nehemiah are seeing what's going on and providing counsel and guidance to facilitate this very real thing, this very consequential thing that is happening right before our eyes here in Nehemiah chapter 8. Fun. We'll try and get in some more fart jokes next time around, but I mean, what are you going to do? It's an emotional passage. There's some emotional things happening. I mean, you take what the text gives you. All right, that's plenty. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.